For a conversation about translating research into cures, please welcome Louis DeGennaro, the president and CEO of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, Patrice Mann, a resident physician at the Cambridge Health Alliance, and Mel Mann, a cancer survivor and national coordinator of Myeloma Link. Here to lead the discussion, Atlantic staff writer Olga Kazan.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so next we're going to talk about how we actually translate all this fascinating research, this remarkable breakthrough science, and actually get it into a cure and get that into the hands of patients, which is actually a more complicated process than you might imagine, and that I certainly did. So first we're going to start with a very personal look at how this process actually goes. So Mel, why don't you tell us your story of your own experience with chronic myeloid leukemia and how it went from diagnosis to actually getting into a clinical trial?
Okay, so in January of 1995, I had some back pain and I had some fatigue, and I thought that was normal. Well, a lot of people have back pain and fatigue. So I went to the doctor, and he did some tests, and he came back and he said, "You have chronic myeloid leukemia." And the second thing that he said was, the prognosis is 3 years. So you have leukemia, and you have 3 years to live. And then the third thing he said, the only possible hope for long-term survival was a bone marrow transplant. And that was a bad thing, too, because at the time, there were very few African Americans on the bone marrow registry. And my daughter was only 5 years old. Patrice was only 5 years old at the time. And so that was a big concern. So what I did was I started doing a bunch of bone marrow drives. And I did drives at the Pentagon. I did drives all over the country for the military. I did drives in churches. And we had drives as large as 10,000 people. And I still couldn't find a donor. At one drive, a man came up and he said, "I have leukemia. I have hairy cell leukemia. And I go out to MD Anderson, and I did a clinical trial. You should consider going out to MD Anderson."
And that's in Houston, but
Yes.
you were living in Atlanta at the time.
Yes, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia.
Wow.
And the drive was in Georgia, Columbus, Georgia. And he said he goes out, he lived in Columbus, Georgia. He said he went out to MD Anderson, and that I should go out to MD Anderson because, even though the drives are doing a good job with the drives, that I had possible option with the clinical trial.
Wow, okay. And so you did go out to MD Anderson. What happened once you were actually, well, first of all, how did you get yourself to Houston? Did you look on Craigslist? Like, how did you manage to stay in Houston for so long?
So what he did was he gave me the contact information. So I called MD Anderson, and I actually spoke with the doctor at MD Anderson. And the next, week, I flew out to MD Anderson. And the doctor said, we still have time, because this had been 18 months after I was diagnosed. I didn't know about clinical trials. And he said, first of all, we're going to increase your dose of interferon, and then we're going to put you on clinical trial after clinical trial until something works. So I would go back and forth to MD Anderson. Sometimes I would stay a month on some clinical trials, or for the one that actually, I'm going to back up before I get to the one that actually worked. But I would go back and forth every 90 days.
Wow. And so what happened? So the clinical trials were failing, the drugs were not working.
Yes,
really.
interferon had failed. The other clinical trials had failed. I was at the 3-year mark, and I asked the doctor, "Was there anything else?" And he said, "Well, we have this one drug. It's close, but we still have problems with animals in the lab." And so that was my last hope, and there was nothing that he could do. So I went back home, and then he called me about 6 months later, and he said, we just got approval for this drug that we had problems with, and come on out. So I went out to MD Anderson, and I was the second person at MD Anderson to try the drug that is called Gleevec.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And that's at the 3-year mark.
Well, I actually started the trial at the 3.8 year mark.
Oh my gosh! But life expectancy that they had given you was 3 years.
Yes.
Wow. So you
Yes.
were like, clock is
Right.
ticking.
Well,
what
I
else
could
is there?
barely walk around the block. I was like very fatigued. I was thin. So it was bad.
So how long before the Gleevec actually started to work?
Okay, so I started Gleevec, and I started in August of 1998, and by May of 1999, I ran a 26.2 marathon in Alaska.
Wow. So,
And then 6 months after that, I cycled 111 miles in Tucson, Arizona.
you're like, I'm going to keep going.
Both of these were for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Wow, okay. So the Gleevec really, and you still take it today?
Yes, I take one pill.
Okay.
I don't even have a pill.
Yeah, it's amazing. It actually, so it's the size of a vitamin,
Yeah.
but it keeps cancer away,
Right.
which is cool. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so what is this experience, Lou? Maybe we can kind of zoom out with a perspective from you. What does this experience tell us about clinical trials and some of the obstacles that people face when it comes to actually getting on them?
Thank you, Olga. Let me start by saying Mel and folks like Mel are my heroes because it really is the folks that join clinical trials and allow the testing of new agents, like Gleevec in this case, that make the difference and allow us to advance new treatments. I think Dr. Caligiuri said it well earlier this morning. A patient who receives the standard of care doesn't advance the field. A patient that's on a clinical trial does. Mel joined a phase 1 clinical trial at the earliest stages of drug development, and had a wonderful outcome. I think this is very telling about how important it is to enroll patients in clinical trials. We were talking about it a little bit earlier. One of the places we've made the greatest advances in the treatment of blood cancers is in the treatment of young children with leukemia. In the 1960s, a young child diagnosed with leukemia, the survival rate was 3%. Today it's 90%. So what happened? It's actually pretty simple. In the late 1960s, early 1970s, pediatric oncologists agreed to put every newly diagnosed child on a clinical trial, and so that they could test different protocols, and they agreed to share the data that came out of those trials. And we went very rapidly from a 3% survival rate to a 90% survival rate. I think this is a clear indication of the power of clinical trials. Unfortunately, nothing like that happens with adults. Only 5% of adults adult cancer patients join clinical trials. And so the progress has not been what we've seen. The other thing I'd say about Mel's experience in the late 1990s was when Mel was diagnosed. As he said, the life expectancy for a CML patient was 3 years. Because of Mel's participation and other patients' participation in that trial and the approval of drugs, Gleevec and drugs like Gleevec, today a newly diagnosed CML patient doesn't get a death sentence from their physician. They get a prescription. They go to the pharmacy and they fill that prescription. They take 1 or 2 pills a day. They live long, healthy lives and run marathons and ride cycle rides for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. So I think it's critically important that we continue to do this and educate patients and physicians about the value of clinical trials.
And I want to circle back to what your organization actually does and helps with, because you were telling me that it's not actually that doctors don't want to put people on clinical trials, it's that they might work and live far away, like you did, from where the clinical trial is actually happening. So what does your organization actually help people? How does it help them get on those trials?
It's critical to get on the right trial, find the right trial, navigate all the challenges to getting on such a trial. In Mel's case, he had the resources and the wisdom to do it on his own, and support from his physicians. Many patients don't have that. We run a clinical trial support center. By the way, all of what I'm about to talk about, we do for free for patients, so we don't charge them at all. When a patient contacts us and expresses an interest in getting on a clinical trial, We help find the right trial in the geographic area that they're in. We can help with, we help them with actually enrolling in the trial, which can be complicated at times. When we interact with a patient, 60% of the time, they find the right trial and they get on the trial. So this is much different than the 5% that's in the normal course of what happens. We help with transportation. We help with actually getting to the trial and so on. Mel had to make the trip all the way from Atlanta to Houston on a regular basis, and that can be daunting for patients. We're there. We're a safety net for patients to be certain that they know what's available to them, and they find the right trial, and they're assisted in enrolling in that trial.
Yeah. And I'm going to take questions from the audience in a second, but first, Patrice, I wanted to turn to you and just ask, what was this experience like for you when you, I mean, we saw photos of little you up there. What was going through your head at the time?
Yeah, I mean, these are definitely some of my earliest memories, like bone marrow drives, being at MD Anderson. I think the biggest thing that I remember are the different types of community that I felt a part of. It can be a very isolating and lonely experience to have this diagnosis and be part of the family unit that's dealing with it. But I think in our case, we had, the people that you expect to be in your corner, your extended family and, friends, but also like church members. And when you're at these different bone marrow drives, it's just such a visual, like emotional show of support of a group of people getting together and trying to find a bone marrow match for whomever might, benefit from it. And then also just like being out at MD Anderson, it's, when you're at a cancer center, there's kind of a camaraderie of people and a mutual understanding and, different support groups. So I think that's part of why it's so cool to see my dad doing some of the work that he does, like going out into the churches and health fairs and things like that, getting kind of this community involvement. It's like kind of full circle.
What advice would you have for other family members of people who are dealing with cancer?
Yeah, that's a big one. I would say definitely, try and figure out what kind of community that you can, become a part of, inquiring about different support groups, inquiring about different resources. It's very difficult, kind of as has been said, to know even what resources you can tap into. But, sort of doing your own research, inquiring people that you trust to help you kind of forge your own, get involved in your own care, because it is very overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Hi, Casey Smadzinski. So my question's around, and thank you both for sharing your story, but on clinical trials, we all talk about getting more people on clinical trials. My mother failed 2 clinical trials, and one of the things we saw was just in the intent to treat population, you're looking at the best patients, the healthiest patients, and it's not necessarily representative of the people in the real world that are actually going to get this treatment. So maybe one of you can talk to how to improve that and to include more of the representative population in these trials so we can get results that actually match the real world efficacy.
Yeah, maybe I can take a quick crack at that and then over to Mel. I think there are a lot of factors at play here. The good news is the FDA, particularly the division of the FDA that's focused on oncology, has been nothing short of visionary over the last few years in creating new mechanisms to speed up enrollment in trials and the time at which it takes to approve new cancer drugs. They have created an open door to patients. Recently, we took 14 patients who were diagnosed with a different kind of leukemia, acute myeloid leukemia, to meet with the FDA. We brought those patients and caregivers. The FDA gave us 5 hours of their time. The leadership of oncology at the FDA gave us 5 hours of their time to understand to listen to patients and understand patient preferences. And with that kind of dialogue between the patient and the regulating agency, I believe it's going to open the kind of doors that you're talking about and allow them to have a different vision about the needs of patients, the preferences of patients, and the type of patients that you really want on clinical trials. It's going to evolve, but I think it'll evolve very, very quickly.
And
Mel?
with Gleevec, the only patients that could get on the trial, this is phase 1, were the patients who had actually failed interferon. So you're not dealing with the best patients, but the patients that were not responding to any drug.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one more point, Gleevec has helped over 300,000 people, and of that 300,000 people, I'm the longest living Gleevec survivor in the world.
Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Danielle, and I'm from over here.
Oh, sorry, I can't see
I'm
very
from
well.
Share Cancer Support in New York City. I was also diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia, and it's just so weird that the differences in our diagnosis. When I was diagnosed, my doctor was like, if you're gonna have leukemia, this is the best leukemia to have. And within 2 months, I was like cured. And I'm on Sprycel, and I'm gonna be on Sprycel for the rest of my life, but there are really no side effects, and
Yes.
there's really,
Yes.
it doesn't really complicate my life at all.
So I think there's an important message here.
Yeah.
Look at the remarkable progress that the sciences and the medicine has allowed us to have. This is a gene-targeted drug, right? It's not classic chemotherapy. It doesn't have the challenging side effects that cytotoxic chemotherapy has. This drug goes after the bad-acting gene that drives the cancer and leaves the good cells of the body alone. And in both cases here, it was the right drug to the right patient at the right time. There's a lot of discussion, there'll be a lot of discussion today, some has happened already, about precision medicine, personalized medicine, however you like to say it. This is the future, the near-term future anyway, of cancer care. And we've got 2 great examples right here in the room with us. It's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Jim Roberts, here from New York City. I've been involved with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society in various capacities since the 1990s. And Lou, there's been some tremendous progress that has been made, particularly in the last 2 years. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that progress and the role that the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society has played.
Let me frame it up this way really quickly. Last year, the Food and Drug Administration approved 18 new treatments for the blood cancers. 18. So just to scale it for you, historically a good year would be 2. A great year would be 4. There were 18 approvals. That was last year, 2017. This year, we're on track for 15 new approvals. The message that I take away from that is the science and the medicine, the technologies have really come together in an incredibly productive way around the hematological malignancies, the blood cancers, leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma. One thing you really need to know, the cycle time of a drug is 10 years. It takes 10 years to develop a drug and get it to a patient. So the investments that were made to create the drugs that were approved last year and this year were made over a decade ago. And I think it's a testament to organizations like the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. We have, since 1994, we've been able to deploy $1.5 billion into basic research and clinical research to drive these therapies. And it's that long-term, consistent, significant funding that really is paying off today with all of these new treatments. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, and you said it's actually, it's many different, like even though they have one name, it could be up to like 60 different diseases, right? Which is why you need all these treatments.
We call a disease lymphoma, but it's actually 60 different diseases. We can distinguish 60 different diseases based on the molecular underpinnings of the disease. It's why it's so important to be seen by a specialist when you're diagnosed with a blood cancer and be certain that the genetic underpinnings of your disease are revealed, because it really guides treatment today.
Yeah. Well, I think that's our time, but thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We really appreciate it. Thank you.